I need to ask all of you this question because it's fascinating. Is Donald Trump turning Benjamin Netanyahu into a bit of a sucker?
Well, Netanyahu, Bibi's yesterday's man. The centrality of Israel and Netanyahu was really eclipsed this week. That was the biggest theme, unstated, was where Trump wasn't in Israel. I think Trump got angry in February when Netanyahu came to Washington in the expectation that he could push Trump towards military action against Iran. And my sense is that Trump felt jammed. And ever since then, as Andrea said, he has been pushing back. I'm just very curious whether this is going to end up costing Netanyahu in Israel. I mean, if he's no longer the Trump whisperer.
Just one quick fact is that the Sunday before this trip, Netanyahu expanded the war in Gaza and called up the reserves against half of his own population and against the interests of the hostage families.
Yeah.
And against the former people in the IDF, including the defense ministry had fired. So by expanding the war, he was going up against Donald Trump's stated desire to rebuild Gaza.
Right.
And now we're reporting tonight that they are working on a plan to move 1 million Gazans to Libya.
Peter, stay on the subject of Bibi and also answer the question. Well, it's almost a asked and answered question. 1 million Gazans are not being moved to Libya.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Look, I think we should learn in the last 10 years not to make predictions, but it's awfully hard to see how that happens. Right. Absolutely. And
Libya is a failed state right
absolutely,
now.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's I mean, I think Donald Trump looks at a map and he says, that looks like there's a good property there, right? I mean, it's as simple as that.
But we've all been to Libya. A lot of beachfront.
A lot of beach.
A lot of beach.
But it's in exchange for unfreezing the Libyan assets.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's
a deal.
It's a deal.
It's yet another deal. Look, I think that's what we're looking at here. Donald Trump wants to make deals.
Yeah.
He wants to make big deals.
Yep.
He wants to be flashy. He wants to be in the center of it all. And he wants to be in charge. And I think if you go back to that quote from Steve Witkoff, the word I come up with when I see that is naive. I mean, how hopelessly naive is it? I like the ambition. There's room for disruption.
I don't appreciate your cynicism here.
I'm sorry to be cynical. I mean, I probably should have been more cynical than I have been over the past decade. I would have been right more. But look, I mean, I think it's hopelessly naive to say the kinds of things that he's saying. And Netanyahu, in this case, is really only the latest of U.S. allies whom Donald Trump has sort of cast aside. I mean, think about things that he's been saying about European leaders, about Canadians, about NATO. I mean, long time, decades-long allies. Right. He's sort of cast aside in part because they don't get him the deal.
Yeah. Right. David, it is interesting to note that, yes, he didn't go to Israel. He also has no interest in taking a long grand tour of Europe with all of our friends and allies.
He doesn't. He wants to go to Moscow and see Vladimir Putin and end the war in Ukraine. That's the real showdown for Trump, I think, isn't the Iran negotiation. It's whether and how he can deliver on his promise over and over again to end the war in Ukraine. And the big fear I have, given that he has not really pressured any compromises yet from Russia, is that he will go there, meet, and it'll be kind of Yalta too.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The Ukrainians, are hanging tough, but it would be very hard for them to do.
David, you're just back from Kyiv. Have the Ukrainians figured out the puzzle that is Donald Trump?
So, I was there a week ago. I felt that Ukraine was in much better shape, more confident, more resilient than 6 months before when I was last there. They've learned how to speak Trump. Zelensky, when he was rebuffed in the Oval Office, came back. He was very popular. People at home, kind of rallied around him. And the Ukrainians have realized that they are now part of Europe. The leaders of Europe stand with them against Russia, and that means an enormous amount. That's really what this war is about, is Ukraine becoming European. So I came away actually feeling a little more hopeful.
In fact, look at who was on the phone today, right, with the president. The president leaves the Middle East on his plane ride home. This is the old Air Force One. He takes a call from Zelensky, who's on the line with Zelensky. It's Starmer from Britain. It's Duda from Poland and Merz from Germany.
Starmer has
his
been
friends.
coaching him on
They're
how to deal with
coaching
Trump.
him, right. They are his validators, right? It's not just Zelensky, it's his friends.
And what's the theory of having them all on the phone? That Trump is not going to bully Zelensky if all of the European leaders are on the phone
In a way,
together?
they're tutoring Zelensky, okay? They showed repeatedly how do you deal with Trump. Flattery, gratitude, yes and, not yes but. You know, you say you're exactly right, and then you restate what your position is, even if it's completely opposite of what he said, and you just don't try to poke at him. And I think the solidarity there is important.
Peter, let me play devil's advocate, triangulate devil's advocacy against Steve for a second and ask you. Yeah, Witkoff, these statements, I mean, throwing in Armenia, Azerbaijan was sort of just like a cherry on top. You're not busy enough.
Yeah, right.
But
If it's Tuesday, it's Yerevan.
But are we being overly cynical and saying, well, maybe everything is so fluid now, and maybe Trump keeps everybody so unstable?
We should be skeptical. But David's made, I think, a fair point, which is that Donald Trump is not locked into the old rules, right? Steve Witkoff, as Andrea said, he can come into a meeting saying, hey, I'm sorry, I'm late. I was just on the phone with Hamas. Right? Obviously, Brett McGurk couldn't have done that for Joe Biden when he was his special Middle East coordinator. No Obama person could have talked with the Iranians. Remember when Obama wanted to have a phone call with the Iranian president during a UN meeting? It was this big negotiation. Oh my God, the first time in 3 decades any American. And Trump doesn't care about that. And Witkoff doesn't care about that. He may not even know what the rules are as he's violating them because he is maybe naive or innocent or whatever word we want to use. Okay, there's an advantage of that, Nixon in China. But Nixon was a very canny operator. He had Kissinger at his side. And to say that Donald Trump and Steve Witkoff are Nixon and Kissinger may be asking a lot.
But
right? That we don't know.
When I say that Witkoff has his utility, I think his big misstep so far was in parroting Vladimir Putin's propaganda when he came back. But that was also playing up to the boss, Donald Trump. And so maybe that was tactical. I just think that he could be more effective as an opening act and then bringing in the experts along the way, which is what you'll have to do with the nuclear
They're going to
deal.
need help to pull off the agenda that they've now set. They're going to need real expertise.
How stable is that team inside, though? If you're the Secretary of State, you're competing against J.D. Vance in 2028.
As I think everybody around the table
What?
knows.
Stable is a word a lot.
Stable.
Yeah, that's a word used a lot.
There are internal, deep fractures here between the so-called neocons and the MAGA group. So that's all papered over because of the intense personal involvement of Trump and Witkoff.
That's a very interesting point, Steve, and you've covered this issue for years. The quote-unquote neocon faction in the Republican Party, even in the White House, is not dead. It's not gone. Mike Waltz, the defenestrated National Security Advisor, ostensibly heading to the UN. Marco Rubio, obviously, they come from that. Lindsey Graham came from that. We have something to tell the world about our system mode. They're on their back foot, but I don't think that they're gone forever, or are they?
I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, Marco Rubio, remember this week he said something about praising President Trump for moving beyond the rhetoric of 30 years of failed Washington establishment foreign policy. I would argue that until very recently, Marco Rubio was one of the most effective advocates of that 30-year consensus American foreign policy.
He was one of the most important.
And he's not. He isn't any longer. I mean, not just in his public statements, which certainly hew to the sort of MAGA line, and often, I think, go further than President Trump in his public statements, but also behind the scenes. I don't think Marco Rubio is sort of this bulwark of, conservative internationalism or neoconservatism any longer. I don't think he's making those arguments.
But speaking of cynicism, this was everything about this foreign policy is extremely transactional. It's Russia. It's not that Russia is wrong. It's just that the war has to end. It's not that the fact that MBS oversaw or acceded to the murder of a Washington Post columnist, irrelevant. There has never been less morality informing, even hypocritical morality informing U.S. foreign policy making.
Well, in talking to diplomats, including our closest diplomats, members of the Five Eyes, that circle.
Great Britain and the English-speaking countries.
Right. The real game changer is the level of open corruption. In the first term, Donald Trump promised to not be involved in the Trump Organization and made a big show of that. He cared about that. There were a lot of conflicts of interest, but they were not open. Right. On this trip, the deal-making of the sons in the 2 weeks before, the cryptocurrency selling of access to the president, the airplane, we haven't spoken about Qatar, remaking the image of Qatar. They were apparently, according to reporting today, trying to unload this older plane because of the maintenance costs.
We're gonna talk about corruption in the weeks to come because it's pretty extraordinary. I do have one final question. Peter, you're the unlucky soul. Donald Trump tweeted at the tail end of his trip, has anyone noticed that since I said, I hate Taylor Swift, she's no longer hot? That's a real Truth Social tweet.
Oh, yeah.
You have 10 seconds to explain this, President. You're down to 8.
He was on the plane, his own plane, on the way home. Clearly, he watched something that involved Taylor Swift, and it got him thinking. He just started tweeting. He also did, by the way, the same thing on Bruce Springsteen went after him in the same trip.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about. Well, no, we're gonna spend time next week talking about Syria and Taylor Swift, but we're gonna have to leave it there for now. I want to thank our guests for joining me, and thank you at home for watching us.